Welcome back, Patriots. We have a fascinating exchange coming up between Dr. Phil and Joe Rogan explaining why 1/3 of Americans can't read. Now, what you see on your screen here is a public school grading scale where now a C is considered 44% to 64% to pass the course. When we were in school, 59% was considered an F, 59% or below, and kids were being held back. No longer is that the case. And then we're all in shock and awe when we find out that 44 to 55% of students can't read at grade level. They're not proficient in mathematics. And that's me being generous because we've already lowered the standards to be proficient in reading and proficient in mathematics in the United States. So it really is around 50 to 55% of students are graduating high school that can't read at grade level and can't do basic mathematics. And then we're all in shock and awe when we see these types of things. But this epidemic's been going on for quite some time. And Dr. Phil's bring awareness on the Joe Rogan podcast regarding why 1/3 of Americans can't read, which is insane. Let's roll it.
Right now in the school system, we've got a silent epidemic going on right now and it was exacerbated by the pandemic because it's amazing how many people in America right now. I just had a woman on recently that works nationally with the education programs. And she says 130 million Americans can't read at the most basic level. And I said, define basic level for me. And she said, basic level is they can't read a prescription label. They can't read a simple story to their children at bedtime.
130 million.
130 million.
So that's more.
If you're in the education system, as I am, this is not a shock to me. I have kids that are going into high school or even graduating high school that legitimately don't know how to multiply. And somebody goes, well, isn't that the fault of the system? Absolutely correct. It is the fault of the system, but it's also the fault of the system for not holding that student back and making sure they have the prerequisite skills in order to advance into the next math class or advance in the next English course or whatever it is. So yes, partially it is the blame on the administration, but also where's the blame being put on the student or even the parents who are the number one educators of that student and making sure they have the necessary skills to advance forward? That's my question. Again, the blame could be passed around to many different facets of the education system, but at the end of the day, it's still that child, it's still that student, it's still that teenager, it's still that adult whose education it is. And for their education to be responsible for on an individual level to make sure that they succeed, you can't just always pass the blame on to the teacher or the administration. At the end of the day, it is your education and you need to take hold of that, or you just grow up as an adult and you can't read a child's book to your child, which is wild.
More than a third of the whole country
Can't read a simple story to their children.
That's insane. It's really that many?
Yeah, this is, and further to that, 32% of fourth graders can't read at even a basic level, and 24% of eighth graders can't read at a basic level. And
I want to also mention that's an average. And so if you look at some states, it's upwards of like in the 40s or 50%. I mean, there's actual high schools that don't even have a single person technically passing, if that makes sense. Not a single person can actually read from a specific high school or district in certain states. They're not proficient at all. So these numbers are a lot higher than what he's actually bringing awareness to here. This is wild and insane, but it's been going on for quite some time. I've had students that couldn't even draw a straight line that were seniors. I'm not talking about the nuances of it, folks. I'm not talking about the specifics of a line or a triangle or circle. Just draw me a triangle. Draw me a circle. Just draw it. Just draw a circle. Can't comprehend it. I'm not talking about one student. I'm not talking about 2, 4, 5. Handfuls of students can't even draw a circle or a triangle, and they're about to graduate high school. Let that one sink in. Can't do 2 times 2. Can't sit there and add basic numbers together. Even if you provide a calculator, can't do it. The question is that how did they get to high school, senior level classes without not even knowing how to multiply that's provided to you in K through 5? That's the question. Why? Because the Democrats, these libs, sit there and hold on to the education system. They're the ones that control the power and allow this to happen because they're sitting there and saying, oh, well, there's a disparity among races and ethnicities and all this hubbub. And say, well, let's go ahead and just create equity and equality among everybody in terms of outcome. So let's lower the standards of what it takes to actually advance on to the next part of your course or into college, whatever it is. And then people are blown away when they sit there and can't graduate, or they don't have the necessary skills to get hired at a position. And then they want $20 minimum wage in the state of California to put food onto a plate. And then they're blown away when they can't sit there and actually have an advanced skill in some sort of career because they didn't have the prerequisites to actually obtain that skill into of which the career they're trying to go into, because they never obtained it in K through 12 or in college because they didn't have the skills in the first place. Again, there's a snowball effect taking place here, but the Democrats and libs don't want consequences to take place in the education system when it comes to behavior or grading. And this is the result that you have. Again, I'm not shocked by it, but a lot of people like Joe Rogan are, because again, it's a silent epidemic that Dr. Phil's talking about.
18% of high school graduates, according to the Department of Education, can't read. Graduates. Now, how does that work? You're graduating high school, but you can't read at the most basic level. So,
good question.
When I'm saying there's a silent epidemic, we've got some schools that are changing their grading standards to close the gap.
Which is what we just saw.
So they're making it easier.
Well, one of them that we looked at, a C is now 44 to 64%. You make 45, you got a C. You take a test.
Now, when you see statistics like this, you might think, well, that's already insane as it is. Let me give you a little bit more of what's insane, is that not only can you retake tests and quizzes that you've already seen before, you get to go home, you can do test corrections, quiz corrections. I mean, you can look at notes, you could photo math it, you can have AI solve it for you. In some schools, you're just provided the same exact exam or quiz over again, meaning you just memorize all the steps. Because there's a thing called factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, and procedural fluency. Factual knowledge is just knowledge that you're able to just memorize, like English, vocabulary. You're reading a story, basic to recall certain context of that story. Well, math, there's conceptual knowledge where it takes the factual and converts it in conceptual, meaning you actually understand the concept, and then that rolls into what's called procedural fluency, procedural knowledge, where you're taking those skills, understanding it by giving them a different problem they've never seen before, and taking those skills and now doing a procedure with it, meaning solving the actual problem. And that component of procedural fluency is left out of a lot of the liberal arts, and that's why students tend to struggle in math and science, because they don't have that procedural fluency that's ultimately cultivated from that conceptual knowledge within itself that comes from the factual knowledge. And so what's happening here is students are just given 50% off the bat without ever turning in an assignment. Yes, you heard that correctly. You don't have to do anything, and you still get 50% for just being present in class and not doing a damn thing. So that 44% is remarkably lower in terms of actually passing a course. Nowadays, again, I'm not exaggerating this, you guys. You really just have to show up to school and tie your shoes and maybe put on some clothes appropriately to pass into the next grade or advance into the university system or whatever it is. It's pretty mind-boggling. So that 44% is actually a lot lower. You basically don't have to do anything nowadays.
45, you made a C.
Wow.
Now, was that not an F when you went to school?
That was an F. Yeah.
That was
now
an
it's
F.
a C?
Yeah, now 44 to 64 is a C.
70 was always a C.
Right. That was a C minus because that was the bottom of the C's, right?
Right.
So now 44 to 64 is a C, 64 to 84 is a B, 84 to 100 is an A. You got to drop below 24 to get an F.
Wow, 24.
Now that's how they're closing the gap and pushing them on to the next grade. So if you can make a average of 30, you get a D, that's passing, you move on to the next level.
So instead of fixing things, it just made it easier for people to get through.
Yeah. And I don't see how that's going to work.
No. I mean, if you were a real conspiracy theorist and you really wanted to believe that there was someone that was trying to destroy America from within slowly, this would be the way to do it. All the things we talked about. Make it easy for people.
I wrote an entire book on this, Joe, called Trojan Horse, How the Left is Destroying America. And who holds on the media? The left. Who has control of the education system? The left. It's not conservatives or Republicans. Oh, no. This is the Democrats doing this, folks. You can't blame it on conservatives or Republicans. I mean, slightly you could, because it was under George Bush's administration for No Child Left Behind. But we all have issues, even on the conservative Republican side of the aisle, with George W. Bush. But this is definitely a leftist agenda. They are destroying this country on different facets. This is one of them. Look, kids will come out of the school system being trans and part of the LGBTQ community, can tell you all facets of all that, but they can't even read and do basic mathematics. So I think we have our answer, Joe. We know exactly what's going on.
Able to be homeless, make people think that the world owes them something. Equality of outcome is the desired result. Everyone who's wealthy is evil. If you think there's something wrong with the world, throw soup at a painting and glue yourself to the wall.
Do you notice she is talking about what leftists do? Joe gets it. He totally understands.
I mean, the stuff that we're reinforcing and the way that it's happening so rapidly. I mean, you're older than me. Has there ever been a time in your life where you thought that America could get to the point where it's at now?
No, I have to honestly say no. And further to that point, I've got to say that you get to a point where you start getting scared about whether or not this is something we can come back from. And I'm an incurable optimist. And I really do believe that if people will stop arguing and decide, look, I'm not here to win an argument. I'm here to solve a problem. If people will just take that attitude, we can really change some things that are going on here. Because
I 100% agree, but you have to understand, Dr. Phil, is that there's a specific side of the aisle that even though if you provide solutions, and those solutions will always have an outcome of disparities, because that's the way things work in nature. There's always a disparity, regardless of whatever you're talking about. But because there's going to be a disparity in terms of grades, in terms of students graduating, in terms of people having certain careers, the left can't accept that. So there is no conversation. There is no solution out there other than to lower the standards. And when you lower the standards, you get that of which you're asking for or producing more of, and that's the standard of which is lower. And students will meet that standard of whatever's provided to them. And when you consistently lower it, then they're going to meet that standard of lowering the results as well. So students are going to continue to graduate, not be proficient in math, not being proficient in English. And that's exactly the outcome we get. Folks, this is not rocket science. You see this even on a crime level. If you sit there and don't prosecute certain crimes, you're going to get more of which you're not prosecuting. You see that in Los Angeles. You see that in Chicago. You see that in Seattle. You see that in Portland, Washington. You see it everywhere in terms of that type of behavior that you're basically inculcating and incentivizing because you're not willing to police it or prosecute it. In the same way here, we're not giving students any consequences in the classroom. You don't have to show up to school anymore. You don't have to do any homework. You don't have to actually study. You could pass the class without doing anything. And so obviously students aren't going to do anything because they know they could pass without doing nothing. And they know they're not going to be held back. There's no sense of embarrassment anymore of you being 25 years old as a senior in high school and going, why am I graduating high school? Why don't I have a GED? Of course, I'm being a little bit facetious and jokingly there, but I think you understand the point. It's insane. And I'll give my solution on what I think needs to happen. You're going to have an entire generation lost that can't read, but I think we can fix it thereafter, and I'll provide that at the end of the show.
I'm an incurable optimist, and I do think we can solve this problem. And we've got a lot of kids right now that are experiencing anxiety, depression, and homelessness at the highest levels that we've had since we started keeping records of this kind of thing, which is not that long ago. It's not like since the 1700s. We've just been keeping these records for, I think they really started keeping good records in the, maybe since 10, 12, somewhere back in there. But these are the highest levels that we've seen. And the pandemic didn't cause that, but it really spiked it because these kids were out of school and they got really scared of the pandemic. They lost loved ones. They were afraid of this invisible monster out there. We're going to have to deal with that. And we're going to have to deal with the fact that they lost a lot of time and a lot of learning that put them further behind.
Now, he's blaming a lot of this on the pandemic, and kind of what we've seen as educators is that really the pandemic didn't have a massive effect of what's being portrayed by people that aren't in the education system. At least that's what I've seen from mine. I haven't seen a massive shift in terms of students' understanding. It seems to be pretty much baseline. There obviously is a drop, but my solution to all of this is if you want to sit there and make a shift, you need to have students being held back. You need to have consequences. If there's behavioral issues, you remove them from the classroom. Have a whole separate classroom. If you want to misbehave, then you lose out on your education. That is what happens. You forfeit something. You have to lose something. You can't sit there and keep exacerbating the problem by providing a place where students can misbehave. And then you have other students, say 35 of those students, and one student misbehaving in the classroom that disrupts the classroom so much where now you lower the grade level and the learning experience for all those other 34, 35 students in that classroom because you have one student that wants to act like a knucklehead and you can't do anything about it. I've always shared the story of I had a buddy that was a teacher in Nevada that had 3 students plotting to kill him. And no joke, they had the full messages, they had everything provided. The DA didn't want to prosecute. Those students were back in the classroom with that teacher the next day. Obviously, the teacher walked off the site, never returned again. But that just shows you how hard it is to sit there and actually provide some sort of consequences to students nowadays. It's insane what's going on. And all the blame gets passed on to the administration or the school system or the teacher. Oh, they're not teaching. Folks, I used to say the same thing. Teachers teach. Okay, it's not like they're not doing anything, but what we're seeing is they're spending more time giving behavioral classroom management instruction than they are actually giving real instruction because there's so many behavioral problems because the school districts don't want to do anything because, oh God, there's disparities. Oh, there's discrimination, whatever it is. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, Hispanic. Behavioral issues are happening all across the board, and we need to deal with that first. The other answer after the behavioral and having consequences, like being held behind, not passing courses, going back to the old grading scale, is that you need to shift everything down 1 grade. So if you're 12th grade, you need to be learning 11th grade material because they can't do it. So everything needs to be shifted down, and understand there's going to be a class, a cohort that sits there and basically has to repeat grade level again, but that is one solution to solve slightly this problem. What's going on is lowering everything to 1 grade level down. There's also been discussions of extending high school from 12th through 16th grade. I don't know if I'm for that. There's more conversations that could be evolved because of the coddling of the American adolescent, but also the vanishing American adult. What I mean by that is the brain development seems to be slowing with a lot of these generations as we progress forward, especially with Generation Z. The other mechanisms that we're seeing that Dr. Phil spoke about was the mental issues that are going on, these disabilities with these young adults. 50% of Generation Z folks has mental illness. And that's why ultimately, partially, they're not being hired in the workforce because of the mental issues and the accommodations and just the lawsuits, the insurance, the liability that's going into a lot of these Gen Zers because they can't handle a simple task. And things are only going to get worse because as more we get technologically advanced, students don't have the necessary skills that they need to be able to do those jobs that require those skills. And that has to do with IQ. First time in 100 years, the American IQ score has dropped, which is insane. So this is a huge issue. And I do agree with Dr. Phil here. It is a silent epidemic. And I think by the time we actually bring awareness to this, and I think it's great Joe Rogan is talking about this on his podcast, I think it's already going to be too late by then because I don't think a lot of people are awakening to exactly what's going on. They don't want to have to sit there and take the personal responsibility for what's taking place, if that makes sense. Because at the end of the day, it is not the teacher's education. It is not the principal's education. It is not the assistant principal. Hell, it's not even the parent's education. It is that student's education, and they have to have the personal responsibility, individual responsibility to take hold of that. And maybe they're not mature enough, but that's why us as adults, we have to sit there and guide them. And sadly, even though you lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink it. And you have to come to terms with that. There's just going to be people that will fall through the system. It's not fun to say. It's not exciting to talk about. It's not something we should be saying loosely, but that is the reality. School isn't for everybody. Not everybody wants to go through it. Not everybody wants to study. Not everybody wants to do all these things. They want to be streamers and TikTokers and all these social media influencers. There's consequences of that. And sometimes you have to let somebody live out their life and reap the repercussions of those consequences. And maybe they'll figure it out. That's why we had continuation school. That's why we have all these other mechanisms. They don't even have to go to school. They can go into trade schools and all those other things. A lot longer than what I wanted to do here, but I think you understand where I'm coming from. We need to fix it. There's ways to fix it. There will always be disparities. There'll always be different outcomes for individuals because we're talking about the individual. But let me know, what do you think the solution is? Are you thinking the solution here is to lower the standards even further, where 44% to 64% is classified as a C? Do you think students should just be getting credit for not turning in anything? Do you think they should get half credit for turning something in late when it was due at a specific time? Are we inculcating the right values in our students by turning things in on time and getting a project done on time? Let me know about all this in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. With that being said, I'll see you next time here on The Paul Brad Show.